attention to this. And thank all of you for joining. Today we're going to talk about the parsha that is called Vayishlach. This you will find. So we're just going chronologically in Sefer Bereshit in the book of Genesis, chapter 32, starting with verse 4 to chapter 36, starting with verse 43. Now, it would seem if you were going to divide up the Torah into parshas that you would just do like whole chapters, right? Like let's do this parsha will be chapter 32, 33, 34, 35 and like make it clean. Why does a parsha start in the middle of a chapter or end in the middle of a chapter or end before the end of a chapter? You may be aware of the idea that chapter and verse was a later Christian addition that that we have adopted it and we use it so that everybody's on the same chapter and verse. But in general, and I might have said this to you before, if you ask a Jew who is knowledgeable about the Torah, where did such and such an episode happen? They will not give you chapter and verse most of the time. They will tell you what parsha it's in. And so you're sort of taking one system and overlaying another system on top of it. And that's why the parshiot start in sometimes in random places. Anyway, that's your little background. The name of this week's parsha is Vayishlach, which literally means "and he sent." Okay, and you find it as always in Bereshit, in Genesis chapter 32, verse 4, which is the first significant word of the parsha. So first we'll do the summary. Um, and then I think what I have to share with you today is something you've never heard before and is different than what most people emphasize when they are studying this parsha. But let's talk about it. So we have Jacob, who's returning now to the Holy Land after his 20-year stay in Haran. And he sends angels as emissaries to his brother Esav in hopes of a reconciliation. So they've been living apart for a couple of decades, but Esav is still needs to be mollified. He's still irritated or angry about what happened when they last saw each other. So Yaakov wants to reconcile with his brother, but the angels come back or the messengers come back, however you understand that, and report that his brother's on the warpath. He has 400 armed men with him. And so Yaakov understands this is not going to be a sweet family reunion. And he does a number of things. He prepares for war, he prays to God, and he sends his brother Esav a large gift that consisted of hundreds of heads of livestock in order to try to appease him before they are physically in close proximity to each other. So the night before the conflict, before the brothers come together, Yaakov ferries his family and his possessions across the Yabok River, and he realizes after everybody's out and across that he's forgotten some small jars. And he goes back to get them. And that night he encounters an angel that embodies the spirit of his brother Esav. And he wrestles with that angel until daybreak. And he suffers from a dislocated hip, but he does eventually vanquish this angel creature who renames him. He's not just Yaakov, but Yisrael, which means he who prevails over the divine. Okay. Anytime a Hebrew name has the word El in it, like I have a daughter named Ariella, El, Gavriel, Daniel, Yisrael, or a name like Elchanan or Eliav, or there's a whole bunch of those kind of names. That syllable is always a reference to God. Okay, so there's this whole episode with the angel. Yaakov gets a different name, and all through the rest of Torah, he is known both as Yaakov and as Yisrael. It's depending on what role he's playing at the time. Okay, so now Yaakov and Esav meet, and things are a little bit better than his worst nightmare. They do embrace and kiss, but they part ways. Yaakov purchases a plot of land near Shechem. Shechem is in the north. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Shechem. The Arabs call this place Nablus, And actually, that is where the tomb of Jacob is, and it's in the news sometime. Not Jacob, Yosef, the tomb of Joseph. It's in the news sometimes because some Arabs riot. It's whatever. But I have actually been there, and the way that Jews go to Shem and to visit the tomb of Yosef is you have to go on an armed bus with an armed guard because it's deep in the middle of this like Arab area, and you usually go in the middle of the night. So you might get on a bus, let's say at midnight. You would arrive there, let's say at 1:30 in the morning, have an hour or two to pray at the tomb of Joseph, and then get back on the bus and leave. And usually it's a not just one bus, but it's a caravan. That's an aside, but that's Shechem. Okay, so Yaakov moves back to the Holy Land from up north, and Shechem um, is where he buys a plot of land. The prince of Shechem is also called Shechem, and he abducts and rapes the daughter of Yaakov, whose name is Dinah. And Dinah and two of Dinah's brothers, Shimon and Levi, avenge this rape by killing all the male inhabitants of the city after they make them vulnerable by convincing them to circumcise themselves. So, in the recovery of circumcision that they've convinced them to do by saying, if you guys all circumcise yourselves, then we can intermarry. And everybody wanted to be part of Yaakov's family because it was a very wealthy, prominent family. So, they all agreed to do that. Well, the leaders did, and they kind of forced it on everyone else. So all these men are recovering from adult circumcision, which is a very serious thing. And that's when Shimon and Levi slew them all. Okay, so Yaakov journeys on. This is obviously just a summary. And his wife, one of his four wives, last week we talked about Bilhah and Zilpah, but of course there's also Leah and Rachel. Rachel dies while giving birth to her second son, Binyamin, and she's buried on the roadside, the grave near Beit Lechem, near Bethlehem, which is very close to where we live. And then there's the whole thing we talked about last week about how Ruvain, who is the oldest son of Leah, he assumes that now, since the favorite wife has died, that his father ought to be with his mother Leah. And so he does that whole switchy thing with the bed. And then finally, Yaakov arrives in Hebron, which is where his father is. And he gets reunited with his father, who later dies at the age of 180. Rivka has already passed away before Yaakov comes home, so she never sees him again, by the way. Okay, and then our Parsha concludes with a detailed account of all of the wives and children and grandchildren of Esav, the family histories of the people of Seir, which is the portion of the land where he settled, and a list of the 8 kings who ruled Edom, which is the land of Esav, and the descendant and his descendants. Okay, so many Parsha commentaries focus on either the meeting of Yaakov and Esav after so many years and all of that, or the thing about Yaakov wrestling with the angel of Esav. And we're going to focus instead somewhere completely different, and that is on the story of Dinah. Now, so in Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, we read about the births of the children of Yaakov. Because by the time we get to our parsha, they're all born. Okay, so just to review, Leah gives birth to 6 of the 12 tribes, and there's a language that's used, which I'm not going to say it in Hebrew because you can easily see it in English. If you have a Bible in front of you, and you open up to Bereshit, to Genesis chapter 29. But if not, I'm just going to read you the verses because they're very close together in the text. Okay. So the about the birth of each of her children, so I'm starting with Genesis chapter 29, verse 32. Okay. And it says, and Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuven, for she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, for now my husband will love me. That's chapter 29, verse 32. In chapter 29, verse 33, it says, and she conceived again and bore a son, and she said, since the Lord has heard that I am hated, he gave me this one, and she named him Shimon. Shimon is related to Shema, related to the concept of hearing. Bereshit, Genesis chapter 29, verse 34. And she conceived again and bore a son. And she said, now this time my husband will be attached to me, for I have borne him three sons. Therefore she named him Levi. Chapter 29, verse 35. These are successive verses. She conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will thank the Lord. Therefore she named him Yehuda. And then she stopped bearing. Yehuda is related to Hoda'ah, which is the Hebrew concept of thanking. In fact, the Jewish people who are called Yehudim comes from this concept of being a people who, excuse me, who praise God through thanks. Okay, then we skip a little bit to Bereshit chapter 30, the next chapter, verse 17, because Leah had a little pause. Like she had her first four children very quickly. Then there was a pause. There's a whole Bilhah and Zilpah episode. And then she starts again chapter 30, verse 17. And God hearkened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. And chapter 30, verse 19. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Okay. Now, then it says in chapter 30, verse 21, and afterwards she bore a daughter, and she named her Dinah. Does anybody with a text in front of them or who is listening very carefully see a difference between the first six verses and this one? If you see it, you just
Her heart has changed. Maybe she's more positive, happy.
okay, I'm looking for something specifically in the language of the verses. Jody, do you want to say something?
Yeah, it seems to me that it just announced the birth rather than saying Leah conceived again and bore a sixth son. It just says, and after this, she gave birth to a daughter.
That's exactly right. So in all, that's exactly the point. In all of the other cases, it says she conceived and bore. She conceived and bore every single one until we get to Dinah, where it just says, and afterwards she bore a daughter and she named her Dinah. Now, this is where the really interesting stuff, I think, comes on. Okay. For the description of the birth of Dinah, the Torah deviates from the language that it has been using up until now. And so that creates, this is the way that rabbis study the Torah and say, oh, wait a minute, the language here is different. What is that? And there's different explanations for why the Torah uses different language to describe the birth of Dinah as opposed to the birth of all of her brothers. And that's where we're going to go. So we begin with this analysis that is from the Midrash, that Dinah was originally created as a male. And through the prayers of Rachel, of Rachel, who said, may Hashem add for me an additional son, the child became a female. Okay, now you have to just wrap your brain around this. She's pregnant. Leah's pregnant with a male, which would be what? It would be the seventh child. Now, both Rachel and Leah knew that they were destined to be 12 tribes. They were both prophetesses, and they knew that they were destined to be 12 tribes. So far, 10 of them have already been born. Six to Leah, two to Bilhah, and two to Zilpah, which we talked about last week. Did I say 10? Yeah, six. Right. So 10 of them have already been born. Rachel at this point has had zero. If Leah is pregnant with another son, a seventh son, that means that Rachel, at the most, is only going to have one son to contribute to the 12 tribes. And that will mean that she, as the primary wife, has fewer sons than the handmaidens, Bilhah and Zilpah. Okay. So that's really important to keep that in mind. So, um, so there's a number of key points that can be gleaned from this. Number one, we in this scenario, Rachel is the one who's praying. Number two, the miracle that happened was that the fetus changed genders in Leah's womb from male to female, and that this happened actually after the birth of Yosef, according to this one opinion, because she asked for an additional child. Um, so she already had one son. Now, there's another um, the what was the afterwards in the verse that we looked at in in chapter 30, verse 21, and afterwards she bore a daughter and she named her Dinah, referring to Leah. What is the afterwards? The afterwards is after Rachel prayed. Okay. That's what is that then the fetus became a female. That's one way of understanding it. There's a different perspective. Okay, so there's another opinion that each of the tribes was born with a twin sister, and they each married a different twin who was all right, each of the tribes married a sister who was born to a different mother. Okay. So one simple opinion is that Dinah was the twin of Zvulun, who was one of the 12 tribes, and she was born to Leah. But there's a slightly different variation of this that led to Dinah's birth. That okay, so Leah sees through prophecy. She knows that there's supposed to be 12 tribes, 12 sons born to Yaakov. She's already given birth to six. She's now pregnant with another male child, and she's concerned for her sister, concerned that her sister is going to be embarrassed. Which, if you think about what you know about the story of Rachel and Leah, is that that is the reason why Rachel gave Leah the signs to marry Yaakov in the first place. She didn't want her sister what to be embarrassed. Um, so Leah now, according to this opinion, she's the one that prays, and she says, "Master of the world, if my child is a man, Rachel will then be even lesser status than the maidservants who each bore two tribes." And immediately God heard her prayer, and the male fetus in her womb was changed to female. And afterwards she bore a daughter, and she named her Dinah. Okay, I'm building here, but because there's other opinions that are even more mind-blowing. Okay. The Midrash actually also explains why she decided to call the daughter Dinah. Dinah is related to the Hebrew word din, which means judgment. And so um, she God responded that to Leah's prayer to say, just as you were merciful on your sister, then I will be merciful. I will also have mercy on her. And because the next verse says God remembered Rachel, and then Rachel got married. Okay, got pregnant. And God, this is Bereshit chapter 30, verse 22. And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and he opened her womb. Okay. Now, so far what we have is one fetus in the womb of Leah that was supposed to be born male and changed to female, but there's other opinions. Okay. The other opinions is that so in the first opinion, we have Rachel praying. In the second opinion, we have Leah praying. Um, and here's another variation of this is that it is Leah who prays based on the same calculations of the total number of tribes and all that, but that the miracle was actually different. That instead of a gender change in utero, there's an opinion that both Rachel and Leah were pregnant at the same time. Leah was originally pregnant with Yosef. Rachel was originally pregnant with Dinah. And God heeded the prayers of Leah and exchanged the fetus in the womb. So Yosef was put into the womb of Rachel, and Dinah was placed in the womb of Leah. Why does the text say it does not say and she conceived and bore? Because Leah did not conceive Dinah. She gave birth to her, but she was not the original. I just find this fascinating. I hope you do too. Um, okay, so that is an opinion that the two fetuses basically exchanged places, and Leah gave birth to Dinah, and Rachel gave birth to Yosef. Can you just tell? Are you with me? Am I making sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay. All right. Um, Now there's another version that Rachel's prayer came after Yosef was born, and at that stage, the transfer was Binyamin and not Yosef, who was Rachel's second child, who was switched with Dinah. But that's a minority opinion. There's of um, a combination of these that is sort of a synthesis of both. That the This is such deep stuff, you guys. I hope that you're really appreciating this. That the physical bodies didn't switch between like I don't even know how to describe like one fetus went to one uterus and the other fetus went to the other uterus, but that the male child within Leah changed to female. The female child within Rachel became a male, and their souls switched after the gender changes took effect. So there's both a gender change and a transfer between uteruses, but the transfer was not of their physical bodies, it was of the souls of the children. The so it was on like a metaphysical level, and that's a synthesis of the two major variations of the birth of Dinah. But it all goes back to what the rabbis noticing that the Torah, which is, as you know, what we believe is literally the word of God, because it uses a different language to describe the birth of Dinah, and it does not have that phrase that Jody so clearly pointed out to us, and she conceived, because Leah did not conceive Dinah. These are ways that um, the rabbis help deepen the story. Okay, now um, there, there's I'm just looking at my notes. I don't want to do it because there's another piece that I want to teach you about after Dinah is born. I'm just skimming some of this. Okay, so the rabbis in these ways and the ancient biblical comment, this is not somebody like sitting in their living room making stuff up, right? This has been mentioned throughout the centuries to interpret the differences in language. Um, so there's the issue of afterward in the verse that talks about the birth of Dinah. There's the addition of the word afterwards. What is that afterwards? So now we understand that it is either the prayer of Rachel or the prayer of Leah is the afterwards, and the missing part of and she conceived and she bore. Um, okay, so now I'm going to go on. Unless you have any questions, do you have any questions that you want to say anything at this point? Dean is now born. Dinah is referred to, interestingly enough, as the daughter of Leah. Now I'm in Bereshit chapter 34, verse 1. If you want to, it says, the daughter of Leah went out, Vayetze Dinah bat Leah. Why is she called here the daughter of Leah and not the daughter of Yaakov when the whole story of her rape is told? And so this whole thing about she was originally conceived as a male and only later turned into a female. So Yaakov, this is the way the rabbis understand it. Yaakov helped her conceive a male, which would have been her seventh son. And the change to female during the pregnancy was after his business was done, right? He was out of the picture. So although Dinah is still referred to as the daughter of Yaakov, in this particular case, she is more her mother's daughter than her father's daughter. And I told you already that there was this opinion that the tribes were each born with a female twin. So Dinah was closest in age to Joseph. And they should have been the two that were born of different mothers, and they should have been the two to marry. So the um it had to be now Yaakov's the father of all of them, but each of the 12 sons that would become a tribe married a daughter who was a twin of one of his half brothers, right? So they are what the Torah calls they are paternal siblings, but they are not maternal siblings. You with me? So they don't have the same mother. So this is kind of interesting that Dinah and Yosef naturally assumed that they were from different mothers. He was unaware of this miraculous uterine exchange or however it happened, that led to his birth to Rachel. Um, but technically, Yosef and Dinah were both created in from the womb of Leah, that they were paternal siblings and also maternal siblings. And so it wouldn't be possible for them to marry. So this is so fascinating because that would be a violation of even a Noahide law. And that God arranged for Yosef. You know how old Yosef was when he left for Egypt to get him out of the picture? Jody, do you know?
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that. No.
Oh, okay. I thought you were raising your hand. Okay. Yosef left to go to Egypt at the age of 17. Why is that significant? Because the age of 18 is the typical age of marriage. So God has to separate these two half siblings, whatever they are to each other, so that they don't end up married, because that would be a violation of the Noahide laws. Okay. There is a tradition that Dinah marries Shimon, who's um, one of her sort of half brothers. Um, so there's a whole, so basically what happens is after she's raped and she's kidnapped in Shem. I want to say, by the way, have any of you read The Red Tent? Anybody? Yes, no, no? Okay. Natalie, you read it a long time ago, right? There's this book called The Red Tent that was super, super popular. Maybe, I don't remember, 20 years ago, something like that. And it's based on this story, and it's based on this biblical story. And what it does is it takes this story and it turns it into a love story between Dinah and Shem, okay, the guy who raped her. And that's not actually, he did rape her, but it wasn't a love story. And so there's a whole bunch of fiction, and people who don't know the Bible very well sometimes think that's actually how it happened. But what actually happened is she's raped, she's being held against her will by Shem, and she's embarrassed now because in that time you can imagine that she does not think that anybody is ever going to marry her, and she doesn't know where to turn, and she only agrees to leave. So Shem is pressing her to stay, and she thinks she has no future among Abraham's family, her extended family, and Shimon agrees to marry her so that she knows that she has a future among the nation of Israel. Okay. Now, the nature of this prohibition against incest. Now, remember, we're in the period prior to the giving of the Torah. It's a matter of some debate, but the accepted opinion, as I said, is that paternal siblings were permitted, maternal siblings were forbidden. So, how could Shimon marry Dinah if they were both the children of Leah? So, again, it goes back to this idea that um, if um, the fetuses were exchanged, it means Dinah was originally the daughter of Rachel. So it's something um, like surrogate motherhood, right? That the baby is conceived in one place and then implanted into the uterus of another woman, and or a woman. And so actually this case is brought in Jewish law today um, when people are talking about the whole issue and the in Jewish law about surrogate motherhood. Okay. Now, I want to go on to another character who is part of this story. She actually comes in a little bit later, but she's very connected to Dinah. And so I want to share this with you. Her name is Asnat. I don't know what you call her. Maybe you know her as Asenath or something like that. Um, in the Torah, she's mentioned, if you wanted to look, this is ahead, it's not in this week's Parsha, in Bereshit, in Genesis chapter 41, verse 45, she's referred to as the daughter of Potiphar. Okay, so now we've moved ahead. We're now in Egypt. Okay, the house of Potiphar, where Joseph is going to be elevated to an important position. Potiphar is the wife of Potiphar, and it says that Asnat is married. I'm sorry, is the daughter of the wife of Potiphar, who we call Potiphara. Okay. Now, the rabbis found it very difficult to accept that Yosef, who we'll get to this, I guess, in a week or so, he was being seduced by the wife of Potiphar, and he resisted all of that, and yet um, and he proclaimed his loyalty to God, that he would marry a non-Israelite woman. So now the rabbis have a question about Asnat's origins, and it has significant implications for the descendants of her children, who are Manasseh and Ephraim, who are two of the tribes. Okay, the two sons born to Asnat and Yosef. Okay, so Yosef marries this daughter of Potiphar, this daughter of Potipharah. Now, here's the backstory. Okay, there's two rabbinic approaches to this issue of her descent. One view presents her as an ethnic Egyptian. She was born in Egypt, and she converted in order to be married to Yosef. And she accepted the belief in the one true God. Before she was married, she raised her children in accordance with the tenets of Torah, and she was just like any other convert, um, accepted into the Israelite nation, because it isn't the Jewish people yet, because that whole history hasn't happened yet. But her children were accepted as being part of the Israelite nation. Okay. Um, the second approach, which is the really fascinating one, is that Asnat she's not Egyptian by descent, but she was from the family of Yaakov, and that God arranged things so she would end up in Egypt so that Yosef could find a suitable wife from among the members of his own family. Because remember, he can't marry Dinah because they are maternal siblings. Okay, so he needs a wife. So here's the story. And according to that, I'll tell you how it happened, that according to that, her sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are totally kosher, in the sense that they are part of the family and they continue in the way of Yaakov. Okay, so the traditions that maintain that she was a convert present her as a positive example of conversion and include her among many other devout women who joined the Israelite nation, including Hagar, right, who we learned about, who was Keturah, Tzipporah, who is the wife of Moshe. We haven't met her yet in our Parsha studies. The daughter of Paro, Rachav, who I taught you about last year, Ruth, and Yael, all of whom, according to certain opinions, left behind their people, their nation, and joined the nation of Israel. And so this is actually one of the sources for the idea that the Jewish people should have a favorable attitude toward converts and to draw them close. Okay. So you probably know that the Jewish people are not interested in recruiting converts. And in fact, it's quite difficult. It's possible, but it's quite difficult to join the Jewish people as a convert. But once somebody has done that, they are they are to be welcomed and drawn closer and to be considered part of the family. And so, according to this way of thinking, Yosef married her. She was, in fact, the daughter of Potipharah. She was a native Egyptian, and she converted, whatever that meant in that time, and that one of her descendants was Yehoshua, was Joshua, because Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim, who was one of the sons that she had with Yosef. Am I confusing you with all of this? Okay, good. All right. So, so the midrash on this idea that she's a convert adds that Yosef's behavior is like a positive example for other people who deal with other people in Tanakh who deal with people who want to join the Jewish people. Okay. Um, so for example, Yosef marries Asna. That is sort of uncontested. Yehoshua, Joshua marries Rachav. We talked about that. Boaz, who was a full-blooded Israelite, marries Ruth. Okay. And Moses marries Yitro's daughter, who is Tzipporah, and we'll talk about her when we get to the book of Shemot. I don't know what is Shemot in English? Exodus, the book of Exodus. Okay, here's the other, and this is the last piece that I prepared for you. The other piece of this story that is just kind of mind-blowing, that Asnat is related to the family of Yaakov. She is the daughter born to Dinah by the rape of Shechem. And Yaakov's sons wanted to kill her when she was born because it didn't it didn't look nice for the family, right? There's this illegitimate child who's a product of rape. So you have to, in our 21st century brains, like that's a blaming the victim kind of thing, but you have to assume that back then that was that for there to be this illegitimate child to this unmarried mother who's their sister was considered shameful. And Yaakov understood that that was not the right thing to do. And so what did he do? He took, a couple of different opinions, but he took some kind of um, a piece of gold and either wrote God's name on it, or another opinion is that he wrote about the whole story of Shechem and what happened with that, and he hung it around her neck and sent her away. And God somehow, according to this opinion, he dispatched an angel, Michael, to bring her to the house of Potiphar in Egypt. Okay. Or that Dinah brought her to the boundary of Egypt. But in any case, she ends up as a sort of helpless child in Egypt, and that Potiphar finds her. Now, Potiphar is actually barren. She has no children of her own. And so one day, according to this story, she goes out for a walk near this wall, this border wall of Egypt, and, and here's the infant crying. And they actually brought the baby to Potiphar. Um, and he sees this plate with the either the record of the episode of what happened in Shem or um, the name of God. And Potiphar tells his servants that there's something great about this child. She comes from great people. And he brings her home and gives her to a wet nurse because Potiphar's wife was barren. So she didn't have any milk to nurture this infant. But they take her in and they raise her as their own daughter. And that's why she's called Asnat, the daughter of Potiphar, because she was raised in the home of Potiphar and Potiphar, the husband and the wife, as if she was their own daughter. So um, the cool thing about this is when Yosef discovers her and when they meet, they understand that they are from the same family, right? So she is technically a niece to Yosef. And so the lesson of this, and with this I'll conclude a little early today, is that everything is foreseen by God, that this idea of each of Yaakov's sons being born together with somebody who would marry one of his brothers, except for Yosef, who was not born together with his mate, because Asnat was the daughter of Dinah through this rape with Shem. She was the one that was destined for him. So God had to direct matters so that Yosef could find a wife when he went out to Egypt. She was the one who was suitable for him. And in general, even though that her conception was from an unpleasant episode, she was considered an equivalent, a spiritual equivalent to her husband Yosef. Okay, that is the that is the story of Dinah and the rape and her daughter. Um, shoot. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Okay. And so now we do have a couple of extra minutes. I saw Andrea, you asked a question earlier on, but I wasn't I don't know. Yeah. Okay, Shrem, all right, going back to the whole rape situation. Shrem did love her, but he was a not an acceptable partner for Dinah. And so he tried to convince her to stay. And the only reason that she was willing to consider staying is because she thought there was no future for herself in going back to her people and her and that nobody would take care. I said this already, but his feelings and her feelings are completely different. Does that answer your question, Andrea? Yes. Okay, good. All right. Anybody else before we finish up? Anybody have anything you want to say or ask or respond or anything like that? Did you guys know
If
any of this stuff? Did you know this stuff? All right, Valerie knew. Okay, Natalie, you also knew? A little bit. You knew some of it.
I know the
Okay,
story, but I didn't know the information that you just shared. It
good.
seems like
Good.
in the rabbinical writings, it seems like family lineage is very important.
It's important because um, all right, this is my perspective. I hope we share this perspective. I'm going to say it anyway, is that the family lineage is important because the Jewish people are not just a religion the way other religions are, but we are like a family. And so you have to know like who's legitimately part of the family, who's in and who's out. Um, and so yeah, keeping track of that's why it if Asnat was not properly converted or she was Egyptian, that raises all kinds of questions. First of all, somebody as holy as Yosef, and we haven't even begun to talk about the Yosef stories, which play out around Hanukkah time every year. But how could he end up with somebody who wasn't like part of part of the nation, part of the family, part of the part of the people? And so, yeah. So it is important because the Bible is this, at least the Hebrew scripture is the story of this one family and how this one family influenced the world. Um, Helen, do you want to say something? You look perplexed. Or you're just yawning. Okay. Okay. All right. Anybody else want to say anything? Questions or
Yes, I have a question.
yes.
I was wondering, or I've heard before, but I don't know how much truth it is. Was Leah supposed to go to become the wife to Esau? Was that the plan?
Yes, that was the original plan because Lavan, okay, so there's sometimes it's hard to keep all these family members in your head without like a family chart. But in the generation before, okay, there's two siblings, Rivka and Lavan. Okay, Rivka's the mother of Yaakov and Esav, and
Mhm.
Lavan is the father of Rachel and Leah. So according to one opinion, they are both sets of twins. And so the since everybody has to marry in the family because of what Jody said about maintaining family lineage, the original plan was that the older twin girl would marry the older twin boy, and the younger twin girl would marry the younger twin boy. So the original plan was that Leah was supposed to marry Esav and Rachel was supposed to marry Yaakov. What happened? Leah wanted to find out what kind of guy is this that I've been set up with, and so, according to the story that I remember off the top of my head, she went to the road where a bunch of travelers were coming from the area where they lived because they were in Haran, and the Rivka and her family were in Canaan, and to try to find out what she could find out about this match that she was made, and the things she heard were not good at all.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
she was devastated to think she's going to have, because Leah's a holy woman, and she's going to have to marry this evil, evil man. And so she cries. And in fact, when the Torah introduces Leah, it introduces the Leah with this. There's different translations, but either that her eyes were soft or her something about her, the eyes of Leah, the very first time that we hear about her. And what the rabbis say that means is that when she heard about the character of this guy that she's matched with, that she was so devastated, she cried so much that her eyelashes fell out. And as a result of that, pouring that much emotion, God changed the plan. And not only did Leah end up married to the righteous Yaakov, but she ended up married to him before her sister, who was the original set of the matches. So yes.
Very
Um,
interesting. Thank you.
yeah, sure, sure. Okay. It, Jody, it's nice to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording and